This is Philippines, one of the most important economies in East Asia. With increasing urbanization, a growing middle class, and a large and young population. In the 1950s, the economy of the Philippines had the second highest GDP per capita in Asia, alongside the continent's most modern manufacturing sector, after Japan. Though in the following decades, the Philippines was surpassed by the likes of South Korea, Singapore and Taiwan, which, although they didn't know it at the time, became the first Asian tiger economies. From one of the contenders of Asia's tiger economy to being known as the sick man of Asia, and then shedding this infamous image, the Philippines has transitioned a lot. The Philippines was once a model of development, and second among East Asian economies after Japan. So, let's take a look at the economic history of Philippines. In the 1960s, when South Korea was a land of peasants, the Philippines was the of Asia's industrial powerhouses alongside Japan. They produced consumer goods, processed raw materials and had assembly plants for automobiles, televisions, and home appliances. But in the 1970s and 80s, the Philippines' economy declined, while its competitors such as Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan made exponential growth. Between 1946 and 1972, the Philippines failed to initiate sustainable mechanism for growth. They didn't implement land reform or develop an export-led strategy that gradually would industrialize the country and eliminate underemployment. At the same time, the government initiated policies counterproductive to economic development, overvaluing the peso, imposing high tariffs to protect urban manufacturing, and undertaxing the cities while making the farm population pay for development projects. And the strategy of import substitution failed to stimulate economic growth, and the country's producers missed the opportunity to expand along with the rising world economy after World War II. After 1972, the government became the driving force behind a new economic development strategy that stressed a free market and exports. The manufacturing sector generally benefited from this, enabling them to take a major role in bringing the economy into the modern era. However, government did not focus on reduced tariffs and force urban manufacturers to become more efficient. Political turmoil forced the country to slide into the worst economic recession of Philippines in 1981. During early 1980s, both the political situation and the economy continued to deteriorate. Many observers expressed serious pessimism about the future of the Philippines. There were suggestions that an economic collapse would lead to anarchy or a communist takeover. The major reason behind this decline was the country's flawed economic policy. Nation's external debt ballooned to $30 billion instead of the projected $18 billion, and the balance of payments deficit had climbed above $2 billion. In September of 1984, industrial production fell for the first time in several years, and huge layoffs took place, given an extremely low inventory of materials in manufacturing firms. The rate of inflation doubled following two devaluations of the peso. Also, the country faced its worst liquidity crisis since 1945 due to an estimated $1 billion capital flight. Due to this, they lost many valuable investments in the region at that time. This subsequently led to the Philippines being fell out of the race of Asian tiger economy. But by the start of 2000s, the Philippines economy started to grow again. Between 2000 and 2009, growth averaged over 4.5% per year, accelerating to almost 6.5% in the decade to 2019. Let's understand the reasons behind this phenomenal growth. Philippines' services sector was the game changer. Many countries achieved their economic growth by transitioning from agriculture to manufacturing, and then to the service sector. Yet for Philippines, this transition was very direct. The service sector of the Philippines overtook the industrial sector in terms of GDP contribution during the early 80s when manufacturing was crumbling. The services sector today employs 56% of the country's workforce, which is more than the agricultural and industrial sectors combined. According to an Asian Development Bank working paper, the Philippines is often referred to as a country from which export of services rather than manufactured goods is the principal engine for economic growth. In the 2000s, GDP growth accelerated, reaching an average of 4.9%, which is close to the ASEAN average. This growth was partly fueled by remittances from Filipinos working overseas and by export earnings from the semiconductor and electronics industry, and more recently by IT services exports and by tourism. The Philippines stands out because of the large number of Filipinos working overseas. Remittances from overseas workers corresponded to 9% of GDP. The country's principal strength is its large, educated workforce with strong English language capabilities and a reputation for being flexible, adaptable to both Asian and Western cultures. However, Philippines being the fourth largest recipient of foreign remittances shows that they lag to create well-paid jobs to this huge educated and professional manpower. So in order to make more money, people tend to go work in foreign countries. But one thing that Philippines has cracked is education system. Filipinos are preferred workers all around the world. The vocational schooling or professional education system is robust as it produces qualified, heavily demanded individuals. Well, now we all know that Philippines is now on the right path, but it also experienced the worst performance of any major Southeast Asian economy in 2020. So, let's discuss the challenges that the Philippines might face. Compared to other regional countries, the Philippines has quite low flow of foreign direct investments. There are many reasons for that, like relatively poor infrastructure, which is a main problem for industrial as well as tourism sectors. Philippines is a country which can be very attractive for tourism as it is an island nation. The Philippines has traditionally ranked poorly in the World Economic Forum Annual Survey on Travel and Tourism, which calculates a country's competitiveness index. Have a look at these numbers showing the international tourists arriving in Philippines as compared to other ASEAN nations. The difference is very clear. The 2009 report ranked the Philippines lowest among its ASEAN neighbors in terms of number of airlines with flights from the country and the availability of good air connections to overseas markets. It also lagged behind in the quality of roads and the ground transportation network, and restrictions on foreign ownership of companies and property rights remain. Also, some economic policies are making it harder for companies to do business. The Philippines is ranked 95th in Ease of Doing Business Index. Philippines also has the highest corporate tax rate in the world. And this is not good compared to other countries in the region. Now if we take the service sector, which is the main pillar of the economy, then it might also face challenges in the future. For the lucrative IT industry, it is essential to effectively respond to changes in demand and competition in developing services, and give utmost priority to developing technical, managerial, and entrepreneurial talent. They need to develop multiple avenues for financing, improve infrastructure and living conditions, and improve the legal and regulatory environment. Moreover, strong efforts are needed to attract foreign and local investment and entrepreneurship. These all factors remain as big hurdles in attracting tourism investment, especially by international chains. The time and cost needed to start a tourism enterprise also deserves attention. A survey covering 139 countries ranked the Philippines 98th in regulatory framework constraints, 94 in business environment constraints, and 75th in human, cultural, and natural resource constraints. The economy is still far away from the digitization standards of its rivals in the region. 7 out of 10 Filipinos receive their wages in cash, which shows the weak consumer infrastructure. This also creates challenges for the government in helping those who need the support the most. The country also faces the worst income inequality issue in the region, while scoring 0.43 on the Gini coefficient. These are all the issues that Philippines needs to work on. So, what is journey it has been for this country? From being one of the contenders for the esteemed Asain Tiger Status to be known as the sick man of Asia. Philippines is however back on track. Although COVID did damage its economic growth due to its reliance on services sector, the country is poised to achieve over 5% growth rate. So that's it for learning about Philippines. Although there is tons of important information that we had to cut out due to the sheer length of the video. But this time I will be asking you all a question. Do you all think that the Philippines will be able to catch up to its rivals of the 1950s? I want every viewer to answer this question in the comments. Do leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Follow us on Twitter to engage with us. Subscribe to stay updated and share our videos. Till then, goodbye.